that see the clear skies for longest, and here temperatures dipping into the singles figures, perhaps the low single figures by dawn. But in the west, already by dawn, outbreaks of rain, a strengthening wind as well, so a wet and windy start for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England as well as Wales. The rain does move its way eastwards. It turns more showery through the day, and after a bright start, the southeast turns more cloudy with some light rain by the end of the afternoon. Similar temperatures to Tuesday, not far from average for the time of year, and it does brighten up in the north and the west by the end of the afternoon with a mixture once again of sunny spells and showers. But the showers fade away through the evening, so for many, clear spells again on Wednesday night. But with a keen breeze, it's not going to be quite as cool overnight. And then Thursday brings with it more rain or showers, another blustery day, but the weather settles down on Friday and the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. We'll be talking about those pictures of Boris Johnson toasting with a glass of wine in Downing Street as Conservative MP Peter Aldous tells me the Prime Minister must go. We'll show you that shortly. Plus, fly tipping, worker shortages in food and farming, and I've got the most incredible constituency surgery with a woman whose vulnerable elderly mum married a near stranger months before her death. The man got all her money and buried her in an unmarked grave. The family lost over £400,000. First, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Downing Street is reportedly expecting to receive Sue Gray's report into lockdown parties tomorrow. Boris Johnson held a cabinet meeting this morning as he now faces fresh questions about whether he lied to Parliament. Leaked photographs that have been published by ITV News show him raising a glass at a leaving do in November 2020. He told MPs there was no party that day. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, says it's time for the Prime Minister to quit.
I don't understand how he can reconcile what he said at the dispatch box in Parliament when he said there was no party that day with these photos. Now, you know, in the olden days, lying at the dispatch box was a resigning matter.
West Ham defender Kurt Zouma has admitted kicking and slapping his cat. Let's find out more. We can go live to the Thames Magistrates Court where our reporter Ellie Costello is there for us. Ellie, a very good afternoon to you. Just explain to us what happened.
Hi, Rosie. Yes, here in Court 7, Kurt Zuma was in the same dock as his brother, Johan Zuma. And in that viral video posted in February, Kurt Zuma is allegedly seen kicking and slapping his cat whilst Johan Zuma laughs. Now, today, both pled guilty to charges under the Animal Welfare Act, charges brought by the RSPCA. Kurt Zuma, the West Ham defender, he pled guilty to 2 charges of unnecessarily causing suffering to an animal, including kicking a cat in the abdomen and slapping a cat around the head. His younger brother, Johan Zuma, who plays for Dagenham and Redbridge Football Club, pled guilty to aiding and abetting the unnecessary suffering of an animal. Prosecution pointed to the fact that this viral video lasted 41 seconds. They said it was a deliberate attempt to cause suffering, whereas the defence lawyer attempted to mitigate by saying that both brothers had pled guilty as soon as they could. Kurt Zuma had received a large fine and had not been called up to play for France since the incident. But the judge has now adjourned the case and we will be back here on June the 1st for sentencing.
Now, oil and gas companies are urging the government not to enforce a windfall tax. In an open letter, 31 organisations in the UK's offshore energy supply chain say the one-off tax would reduce investor confidence in the UK and have severe consequences. Boris Johnson has already said he's not attracted by the idea of new taxes, but nothing's off the table. Climate change protesters have interrupted Shell's annual general meeting, with some gluing themselves to seats. Chairman Sir Andrew Mackenzie was forced to pause the event at Central Hall in Westminster when demonstrators stormed the room. He says it could take hours for police to remove them. The oil giant is hoping to resume the meeting this afternoon. MPs have called for the most senior civil servant at the Foreign Office to resign over what they've described as deep failures of leadership during the evacuation of Kabul. Sir Philip Barton stayed on holiday until the operation in Afghanistan was completed last August. The Foreign Affairs Committee says he showed determination to avoid unearthing the facts during its inquiry. The committee also say it's yet to hear a plausible explanation on why the Prime Minister approved the evacuation of dogs from the city. The World Health Organization says the monkeypox outbreak is containable and that they're working with officials to contain the spread. 131 cases have been confirmed now in 19 countries. 37 cases have been confirmed in the UK. The UK Health Security Agency says it's the first time there's been suspected human-to-human transmission in Britain. Officials believe the risk to the population remains low, but they say they're keeping it under review. Thousands of people have already travelled on Crossrail's Elizabeth line after it opened to the public this morning. Hundreds of enthusiasts from across the country queued in central London, hoping to be among the first passengers. Well, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan described it as a game changer that will benefit the whole country.
One of the lessons we've got to learn is don't stop now. Invest in the next one and then the next one and the next one, because we can do this well now. We've learned the lessons. This project will contribute more than £42 billion every year towards our nation's economy. It's already created 70,000 jobs across the country.
This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's go back to Gloria for the briefing.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, the Sue Gray report into COVID rule breaking is on the way this week, and photos of Boris Johnson with glass in hand in Downing Street have emerged. Conservative MP Peter Aldous tells me the Prime Minister needs to go. I'll bring you the latest from our political correspondent Tom Harwood. I have the most heartbreaking constituency surgery with Labour MP Fabian Hamilton and his constituent Daphne Franks. Daphne's 91-year-old mum with dementia secretly married a much younger man. When she died, he buried her in an unmarked grave and wouldn't allow her family to go to the funeral. He also took all her money. The family have lost over £400,000. And is fly tipping a problem where you are? And I bet it is. I'll talk with Saki Bhatti, Conservative MP for Meriden, about it. He's leading the debate in Parliament today. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Today's top story, the Prime Minister is facing new questions about his statements to Parliament after new photos emerged showing him raising a glass at a lockdown leaving do in number 10. It comes ahead of the imminent release of Sue Gray's so-called Partygate report. Our reporter Paul Hawkins has more.
This was one of the parties the Met was investigating. It was taken on November the 13th, 2020, when England was in lockdown. The question, why some people at this party were fined for breaking COVID rules, but the PM wasn't. More pictures, plus WhatsApp messages and emails between Number 10 staff are said to be on the way when Sue Gray publishes her full report. There'll also be more details about 16 events held over 11 months between May 2020 and April 2021. 12 of those were investigated by the Met, with 83 people fined, including both the Chancellor and the PM, for attending his birthday celebrations in June 2020.
I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public.
Sue Gray is also likely to name some of the civil servants who broke COVID rules. And it might also answer key questions like why some Downing Street staff were fined for attending a Number 10 garden party in May 2020, but the PM, who was there, wasn't. This will be the warts and all version, after her initial report in January said the Downing Street garden was used for inappropriate gatherings without clear authorisation or oversight. There was an excessive consumption of alcohol in Downing Street and failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. What the report won't answer is whether the PM lied to Parliament when he said this.
And that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured.
That's the job of Parliament's Cross-Party Privileges Committee. They'll begin their investigation as soon as Sue Gray publishes her report. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Joining me in the studio is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. He's not out of the woods yet, is he?
No, certainly not. And this has been a rollercoaster ride, really. If we remember, it's over 6 months now that we've been talking about various events in Number 10 and in Whitehall. Some that started to be, of course, in that leaked video footage of the former spokeswoman Allegra Stratton talking about a party. That one, of course, the Prime Minister wasn't at, but then so many more became known. And it seems like this story has ebbed and flowed in so many different ways. If we were talking this time yesterday, we'd be talking about how safe the Prime Minister seemed. And now today there seems to be a lot more consternation. However, have the facts changed? And I would argue potentially not. We knew that there was an event on the 13th of November 2020. We knew that the Prime Minister gave a speech at that event. Indeed, that was reported that very week in the Times newspaper, that he gave a speech at a leaving event in the office of Lee Kane, his former Director of Communications. And we also knew that a number of work events, or events described by Downing Street as work events, featured alcohol. So all of those individual aspects of the story we knew, but seeing that picture there does make it more visceral, does raise questions in people's minds. Although what many people on the Conservative Party side of things would probably say is, looking at that picture, does it look very different to the picture of Sir Keir Starmer with a beer bottle in hand, drinking with colleagues at what he said was a work event? What is the actual difference between these two events that took place during times when indoor socialising was banned, but indoor working, if you were a key worker, was allowed? It doesn't seem like there is the greatest of distinction there. The big question is over a comment that the Prime Minister made in December of that year in Parliament at the dispatch box, asked if he could say what went on the 13th of November 2020. He said no. Now, many people would interpret that as saying, was he at a party? No. But other people would interpret that as saying, I don't know what happened on the 13th of November. I don't have a Rolodex of dates in my mind. So there are two different ways that you can interpret that question. And clearly, there will be many, many people poring over whether or not the Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament. That's the key issue.
Absolutely. Tom Harwood, as ever, thank you. Now, old mattresses, broken bikes, is fly tipping a problem where you are? It's a problem for most of us, isn't it? It's a real issue in many parts of the country. Today, MPs are debating how to tackle it. Saki Bhatti is Conservative MP for Meriden and he's leading that debate. I'm delighted he joins me now. Good to see you. It's the first time we've spoken on the show. You're very welcome. Forgive me if I just start by asking whether Boris Johnson continues to have your support as party leader.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Look, I was listening very closely to what was just said. I'm leading debate today on fly tipping because a lot of my constituents are raising this as an issue. And when I was knocking on doors in the local elections, the consistent theme that I was hearing was actually that we need to focus on the issues that matter. And there's, Ukraine is a serious issue that's happening, cost of living we're looking at, and that's where my constituents want me to focus.
OK. So fly tipping, it used to come up all the time when I was an MP. It is illegal, yet it's such a problem. Why?
Well, look, there's a whole host of reasons. And the reason I called the debate today is because there are lots of good people and good organisations across the country. And do is help encourage the government to get to a place where supporting those organisations to help do better enforcement, but also encourage residents to be aware of the risks of fly tipping, because there's an economic cost, there's a social cost, it's a criminal act, and we've got to try and come together, because ultimately it's about protecting our communities and instilling pride in the areas we live.
But it is a criminal act, as you say, but fixed penalty notices and fines imposed by courts fell in 2020-2021 compared with the previous year, and that's in spite of the rise in this illegal dumping. So people aren't paying the cost of doing it.
Well, Gloria, I think you're absolutely right. One of the key things I'm talking about today, and I'm sure it's a very well-attended debate from what I hear, and or it will be, and the level of enforcement certainly needs to be looked at. And I'm talking about making sure that we're beefing up police powers, that we're giving the resources where they are. One of the things I call for is not only greater fines, but for that money that's raised to be allocated to parish councils, for example, who are doing great work. One of my villages, Barston, which was recently voted one of the most idyllic villages in the country, they funded their own ANPR cameras. So when fly tipping incidents occur, they then share that data with the police. We've then got to make sure that the mechanism is in place for that information to be then used to prosecute the people who are committing this.
Respond to you. You get to put your demands to the minister. What's top of your list?
Well, first of all, recognising the good hard work of parish councils and organisations. But as I've said, greater fines, allocating those fines to the parish councils, a public information campaign, so the public know about the risks of the economic and social aspect, but also then beefing up police enforcement, and also looking at new innovative ways. So mobile recycling bans, for example, I've heard they're working incredibly well. To use a phrase, if you can't get Mohammed to the mountain, take the mountain to Mohammed, and that's what I'm hoping will hopefully start to have a real positive impact in tackling fly tipping.
Just finally, before you were an MP, you were head of Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. Now, fuel poverty, as we know, it's a real problem for a growing number of households. It's also a big problem for businesses who have to heat their premises too. The government needs to do something and stop dithering, don't they?
Well, look, I think the government is doing things, but we also have to recognise, and I had my Meriden Business Forum just on Friday, and it's always great to speak to constituents because you get to understand how they intelligently understand the issue. This is a global problem, right? We've had COVID, the opening up of global economies after COVID. We've had the Ukraine war, that's pushed up the price. So businesses understand that. But of course, we also then have to work with them to find ways of getting the cost down. So the investment in renewables, I think a lot of businesses recognise that. And we have to try and find ways of stabilising the price. And I think the government recognises that. So I'm hopeful that we'll find ways of reducing the impact on business expenses.
Good to talk to you today, Saki Bhatti. Thanks for your time. Coming up, we've a constituency surgery with Labour MP Fabian Hamilton and his constituent Daphne. Daphne's vulnerable elderly mum secretly married a much younger man. When she died, he took everything and buried her in an unmarked grave. Back in a minute.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Labour MP Fabian Hamilton is working with his constituent Daphne Franks to clamp down on predatory marriages. Daphne is in the studio with me now, and Fabian will be with us imminently. Welcome, Daphne. Thank you so much for being here. Tell me about when you found out your 91-year-old mum had got married. Who did she get married to? How well did she know him?
She lived next door to us, so that's a really important point. We saw her all the time and every day. We'd have been aware of the threat from this man for several years. We'd been to all the authorities and either people didn't know what to do or they just didn't perceive the threat. So she died on Easter Saturday, 2016. On Easter Tuesday, when everything opened up again after the Easter holiday, we got a phone call from Mum's GP and he sounded really worried. And he said, "Daphne, did you know your mother was married?" And it was just horrendous. It was, "I'm so sorry, doctor, I've got to sit down." It was because we had seen it coming. We'd been to everyone and tried to stop it and got nowhere.
What was your mum's state of mind when she got married?
I need to say this really clearly. She had a 5-year history of diagnosed vascular dementia running all through her medical records. She also had terminal cancer. In her medical records, a couple of years before the wedding, it says she can't consent to a cancer treatment because she doesn't remember she's got cancer. That was 2 years before the wedding. So she never knew she was married, and actually she was wearing my dad's wedding ring till the day she died. So we didn't know. The man didn't tell anybody.
So your mum, Joan, she dies, as you say, in March 2016. Of course, it's devastating for anyone to lose their mum. But the nightmare doesn't end there, does it?
It was just starting, actually. It was absolutely just starting. She had made a will in 2004. Because marriage revokes a will, the husband would automatically inherit the first 270,000 of the estate, which in my mum's case was all of it. I had registered power of attorney, but the astonishing is there is no link with marriage. So when the marriage was planned, there was absolutely no requirement to tell me that mum was planning, or the man was planning to marry her. She didn't plan it. She never knew she was married.
And he took over the funeral arrangements. Yeah. Tell us about that. It's so distressing.
We took him to court on the advice of a solicitor who said, surely, once it was obvious the marriage was dodgy, they would give the funeral to us. But actually, the judge said, although it was very likely that mum did not have capacity to marry, hey, she was legally married to him. He was her legal husband. He could have the funeral and we could pay all the costs, which was 200 grand on top of the 200 grand inheritance that we lost. The legal fees were and it. As a result of that, the man had a secret funeral after the secret marriage. We couldn't go, we didn't know when it was. We tracked her grave down. It's in a town near Leeds, with which mum had no connection. The grave is unmarked. He remarried in 2018.
I want to bring in your MP, Fabian Hamilton, who you've been working together on this. I mean, Fabian, how can this happen? How can this be legal?
Well, sadly, it is legal. And when Daphne came to see me at my advice surgery in 2017, it must have been, I was so shocked because I didn't think it was legal either. But it's perfectly legal. And what that told me was that the law needed changing and needed changing fast. Now, the more we delved into this, the more we realised that actually this was happening not in vast numbers, but all over the country. All over England and Wales, there were people whose elderly parents, male or female, mum or dad, were getting married by somebody who seemingly wanted to look after them, was maybe 15, 20, 30 years younger, seemed very plausible at the time. But if you've got dementia or you're at the edge of dementia, this can seem really great, but you don't know what the motivation is. And most people, and I've done a little survey on my way here, actually, very unscientific, most people in the public have no idea, including members of Parliament, that if you remarry having made a will, that will is then null and void on remarriage. And that is the key here. That is the motivation. And that's what we've got to get changed, Daphne, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how can you change it, Fabian? What steps can you take in Parliament?
Well, I introduced a 10-minute rule bill in 2017, November 2017. That's just a paper face of the bill with the title on it. It has no substance because you never get any further than the first reading, effectively. But it had all-party support.
Right, that's good.
So the most important thing is this is not controversial politically. It may be within the Law Commission. They may have all sorts of reasons why they don't want this change to take place. But it's not controversial as far as the parties are concerned. So I then asked the Prime Minister a question about this in 2020, I think it was. Or no, 2021. So it was just a year ago.
Yeah.
He promised to put me in touch with the Justice Minister, Lord Wolfson, who was very, very pleasant and helpful and really concerned. We had a meeting in July of last year. He promised to do something about it, but he had to wait for the Law Commission. In the meantime, Daphne went to a very, very well-qualified solicitor, not sure we're allowed to mention names, but who knew his stuff on probate and wills, who wrote a proposal for the Law Commission, which Daphne and this gentleman, this solicitor, myself and a few others presented to the Justice Ministry in December, just before Christmas last year. And then I had a response from the Justice Minister, can't remember who it was now, Tom Pursglove, on Zoom, who was very helpful, actually, but again said that we need to wait for the Law Commission. These things are so bureaucratic. And my argument is that while you're prevaricating, there are people all over the country, not in vast numbers, who are suffering. The whole families are suffering the way Daphne, her husband and her brother suffered as a result of what happened to Joan. And we must stop this. It's very simple. We change the wills legislation, we beef up the training for registrars, and we allow the marriage bans to be published in advance over the internet, not just on the door of the registry office.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just can't believe, like, nobody helped you. Like, the police, or was anybody your ally in any of this?
Nobody knew what to do. We went to the police before Mum died, and unfortunately we hit on a very old-fashioned policeman who just said, oh, people will say you just don't like him. And that was hopeless. Afterwards, they were really helpful. They built a case, they put it to the Crown Prosecution Service, where it failed because no evidence is kept at marriage. If you ring your bank, your call's recorded. If you get married, there's nothing, no record of what happened on that day, apart from the certificate. We know because the registrars wrote she couldn't answer some of the questions, but the man had told them she was forgetful. So they just didn't ask any further because they're not trained in dementia or safeguarding.
Daphne, you are very robust. You're obviously incredibly strong. You've been to hell and back.
Absolutely, to hell and back. And actually, I have spoken to many other cases who have also been to absolute hell and back because we set up a website. We started hearing from other cases.
Tell us about that website, just in case anybody watching needs
predatorymarriage.uk. And we set the website up, we started hearing from other cases, and then we went to Fabian, who was the first person who really, really listened. And then he looked shocked and said, I'm going to raise this in Parliament. And then he did. And as Fabian just said, it's a totally straightforward cross-party safeguarding issue. I'm very pleased to say that the Forced Marriage Unit are now beginning to roll out some training to registrars. I don't blame the registrars. I don't actually blame anyone, because registrars are low-paid clerical officials who are not trained in mental capacity. How can they be expected to assess whether somebody's fit to marry within a few minutes of meeting them? It's nonsense. It's a leftover from the 19th century. It needs to be changed.
And your mum or your case, it's not isolated.
No,
Fabian's
no,
referred to that. So you come across, you now work with other people who have been...
Lots of them.
Give us
Some of them have become really, really good friends. The predators always seem to do the exact opposite of what the family wants. So one family want their loved one to be buried in Holland, and the predator had them cremated in England. I don't know what it is. I think because, although the money is one thing, to me, the main sort of what's behind it all is control. That's what it's about. It's all about control.
Because I just can't understand why, as you say, the money is one thing, but why deny the family the chance to be at the funeral?
Because these people don't think like you and me. It's all about coercive control. It's as much about... They all keep the money, don't get me wrong, but it's as much about wanting to have control of the person and the funeral and everything, and to score points against the family for some bizarre reason.
Fabian, you're not going to give up on changing the law on this. Are you hopeful that, you've said that you've had good meetings with government ministers, so that the will is there, but you've just got to push them?
Yes, I think we can't give up on this, and we need to keep pushing, because inevitably with government, as in many other walks of life, unless you're there up front pushing, constantly prodding and poking, it goes to the back of the queue, it goes onto the back burner. We can't allow this to happen. As I said earlier, it's not a vast number of people, but the distress, the grief, as Daphne has illustrated, is echoed many, many-fold across the country, and we just can't let this continue when it's so unnecessary.
You cannot get over not being able to go to your mother's funeral. It's just something you can't. It's always there. It's always there. I'm very pleased to say that the General Register Office, who are in charge of the registrars, are now making real progress in catching up and improving the training, which is brilliant. And as I say, it's not down to one bad organisation. It is just down to procedures and laws not having caught up with the 21st century.
Absolutely correct. My sister-in-law is actually a registrar, and she's part-time. And she says that she takes it on herself to assess whether somebody or a couple are capable of entering into the contract. But she's no obligation to do that at all. As Daphne said, they're not well paid. It's
You've highlighted such a terrible horror that you went through, that you're campaigning to change, and I'm so pleased that you came on the show to tell us.
Well, with allies
they
like
haven't
Daphne.
met. I mean, seriously, you were pretty formidable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, food prices are rising as the war in Ukraine affects grain supplies, but here at home, farmers are struggling to get enough seasonal workers to pick crops. Lib Dem MP Wendy Chamberlain is calling for the government to make it easier to hire foreign workers. And have an exclusive interview with the Conservative MP Peter Aldous. He has no regrets about submitting a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister and still says a Prime Minister needs to go. First, it's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 12:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Now, convicted drug dealer Nathaniel Pope has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 24 years for murdering his partner's 3-year-old son. The court was told that Kamani Watson Darby had his ribs crushed at his home in West Bromwich with force similar to that caused by a car crash. His mother, Alicia Watson, has been jailed for 11 years for child cruelty and for causing or allowing his death. The West Ham footballer Kurt Zouma has admitted to kicking and slapping his pet cat. Appearing in court, he's pleaded guilty to 2 counts under the Animal Welfare Act. The 27-year-old was forced to apologise after a video of the incident was shared by his younger brother. Downing Street is reportedly expecting to receive Sue Gray's report into lockdown parties tomorrow. Boris Johnson is now facing fresh questions about whether he lied to Parliament. Why? Well, leaked photographs published by ITV News show him raising a glass at a leaving do in November 2020. He had told MPs there was no party that day. And over 130,000 journeys have already been made on Crossrail's Elizabeth line after it opened to the public this morning. Hundreds of enthusiasts from across the country queued in central London, hoping to be among the first passengers. Well, London Mayor Sadiq Khan described it as a game-changer that would benefit the whole country. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Gloria for the briefing.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My latest Real Me interview was with the Conservative MP for Waveney, Peter Aldous. He went to one of the poshest public schools in the world, Harrow, and realises just how very fortunate that makes him. He's also one of the MPs who submitted a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. And when I spoke to him yesterday, he says that Boris Johnson still needs to go. So, let's start at the beginning. You were educated at one of the most prestigious schools in the world, Harrow.
Yep.
What's it like? What's it like to go to a school like that?
It's a long, long time ago. I was very, very fortunate to go there. My father worked incredibly hard to send me and my brothers there. I remember the first day with a very big degree of trepidation. At that time, I like to think I was a person of fairly average ability, and it did enable me, I think, to realise my full potential. And I think, looking back, I was very, very fortunate to be given that start in life, and I'm very conscious there are a lot of people who don't have that opportunity.
That's really interesting that you would have self-defined as somebody of average ability, but because of the nature of your school, you felt that that was what enabled you to fulfil your true potential.
Yes, and I think, when I look, I represent a constituency which is a coastal community, predominantly the town of Lowestoft, which has its challenges over the last 40 years, and there are an awful lot of people there who don't have those opportunities. And part of my work, I feel, is to give them those opportunities so people can realise their full potential. And I like to think over the last few years, yes, certain advances have been made, but there are still a lot of obstacles placed in the way of a lot of young people, which prevents them sort of really realising their full potential and realising those ambitions and dreams.
Is going to a school like Harrow, is that a help or a hindrance in politics?
Sometimes you think it may be a hindrance because some people may say, well, do we really want to be full of a lot of public school boys? Other times it can be an advantage. If I'm really frank, if I look at the opportunities I've had in life, it got me, actually, to be frank, probably got me my first job as a surveyor. Thereafter, if I was no good, I would have been out of that door pretty quickly. I'm not saying I was brilliant as a surveyor, but I think it opens doors, but those doors close pretty quickly and you're booted out if you don't come up to standard.
I suppose the argument is that the doors may never be open to
Correct.
some people.
That is very true.
When did you realise you were a Conservative?
I think it probably crept up on me, sort of probably really in the very, very early 1970s. And if I remember my first recollection of politics, it was listening on a rather scratchy transistor radio, and it would have been, May 1970, when, very much against the odds, Ted Heath had won the general election. And I think that point in time, I felt, for whatever reason, I felt great. This is my party, and they've won against the odds.
So you've always voted Conservative, by the sounds of it?
I have always voted Conservative. I don't think, I don't think there's ever been a time when I've gone into that polling booth and said, come on, I'm not sure our Conservative candidate is particularly good, but I do like personally that Lib Dem or that Labour candidate. That's never actually happened. I could see a possibility where it could happen sometime in the future, and probably as you get into politics, I found as I've got in work and had the privilege of working in Westminster over the last 12 years, the tribes are still there, but actually you very quickly learn that there are people in those other tribes with whom you have an awful lot in common, who are actually good guys, and actually you do work with them on sort of common projects. And very often you start off thinking, and a good example at the moment is NHS dentistry. You start off thinking, this is a problem unique to my area. We're being unfairly discriminated against. Then when you talk, you suddenly find there are colleagues all around the country from all different parties who have a similar problem. So you then work with them to try to find a solution.
When did you decide that you wanted to be a Member of Parliament?
I think it was probably in the late 1990s, probably after the 1997 election.
So you weren't swung by Blair mania?
Well, and actually, you'd probably also say I wasn't swung by Thatcherism either. I can remember I was working as a surveyor in the 1990s. I can remember the period distinctly. The Conservatives lost the general election in Black Monday in 1992, and it was an awful, very long, sustained car crash leading up to 1997. I remember that day vividly. I voted very early because I then had to go from East Anglia to actually go to a place called East Malling in Kent to look at some papers which had been left aside for me as part of my job. And I can remember it vividly. One felt, come on, this party's not doing very well. It's something I've always had a broad interest in. I'll probably get that stage getting to my late 30s, and I thought, well, unless you do something about it now, you will never have the opportunity to realise that ambition.
Very interesting. Because just reading about you're not afraid to speak out when you think your party has got it wrong. You seem especially concerned about the poorest in society. You believe that what was a temporary universal credit uplift should have been made permanent. Yep. Do you ever feel like you're in the wrong party?
No, I think the Conservative Party has always been a very, very broad church party, and it's important that it remembers that and retains it. It's also been a pragmatic party as well, and again, we need to have that in mind. And there have been great social reformers in the Conservative Party, whether that was the late Ian MacLeod, and also from my most illustrious predecessor in my constituency was Jim Pryor, who was MP from 1958 to 1987, and Jim was he was described as a wet. I think some people may say that's a sort of being rude to him. I would say in some ways today, probably being a wet Tory is a badge to wear with honour. And, it's one nation conservatism, which I think does perhaps at times a term that gets bandied around a little too often and without really thinking what it's through, is about bringing the whole country with you. And as we were saying earlier, giving everyone that opportunity to realise their potential. It's good for them, good for them personally, it's good for society, it's also very good for the country in raw economic terms from our productivity.
So you describe yourself in the one nation tradition. Is the current Conservative government in that tradition, or are you a bit of an oddity in today's Conservative Party?
I hope it is in that tradition, and I think it's important that it is. It remains in that tradition. I think it is corny, but I think on the whole, elections are won from the centre ground, and I think it is important that you don't just appeal to people who are very strong core voters, but you actually reach out across that divide, and probably also bring in people from the centre who may not traditionally have thought about voting Conservatives. So I think there is a sense of, and I think it's something that we as a party must remember, that if we look back at what's happened in the last, with COVID in particular, I have a view that actually what has happened with COVID, and now exacerbated by the awful events in the Ukraine, is probably a 1 in 100-year event, which, quite frankly, it's equivalent to the 1930s depression and crash, and the tools and the means of addressing these problems that we've used in the last 30 or 40 years, they may not necessarily work. And actually, we do have a responsibility, and I'm hearing some pretty awful stories of people who can't afford to sort of boil themselves a cup of coffee. And some people will tell me, with the way that electricity costs are going, that it's cheaper to go to Wetherspoons to get a cup of coffee. I heard this morning that people taking their family heirlooms to pawnbrokers to be able not just to get a couple of £100 to be able to live on for the next few years or next few weeks. And that's from the Conservative point of view. It's not right that we should be a government when that happens, and we do need to address that problem.
You called for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to resign during the Partygate affair. Some of your colleagues did the same but have withdrawn. It is reported that they have withdrawn those letters. Have you?
I haven't, no. I fought long and hard back in late January, early February as to whether I should do that, and I weighed up all manner of considerations, and I concluded then that it would be best for the country and, dare I say it, for the Conservative Party as well, if he did. And I've revisited that decision over the last few months, and I've decided that really those reasons are still there. Now, I fully respect there are colleagues who have not reached that same decision, and that is up to them to one way or another. But if I look what's happened since then, well, we've had the Prime Minister has been fined. We've had a situation where he's been referred to the Parliamentary Privileges Committee as to whether he knowingly misled Parliament or not. And I think we've got to wait to see what happens. But that event in itself is not something that happens very often. I think it's happened 3 previous times since the war, and then never to a Prime Minister. So it's completely unprecedented. One of the things that have changed since then are that obviously there has been the Ukraine war, which was talked about at that time, has actually happened, and it looks at the moment as if it's not going to be like the Kuwait war, that it's going to go on for some considerable time. The problems in Northern Ireland have very much focus has come on those, and they've come very much into the spotlight. And also, obviously, the cost of living challenge. So we've got these enormous challenges there. Some people would say that actually now is not the right time for a change. The other side of the argument is that it will continue to be a distraction. And I think what I also find when I go back and listen to people in my constituency, it really has split people. Some people say, this is, what are we worrying about with these problems? We shouldn't be worrying about parties, get on with it. Other people, and you hear some heart-rending stories of people who weren't able to see their loved ones when they were sadly passing on, and they will never get over it. And I sense they will never forgive. And so we are it's a very, very difficult circumstances. We obviously also, you've got to look at the court of public opinion. We had council elections earlier this month where, whichever way you look at it, they weren't very good for the Conservative Party. And so without any ill feeling or malice, yes, I still hold my views, and my letter still remains with Sir Graham Brady.
Really interesting to chat to you. We never chatted as colleagues. I wish we had have done now.
Yes.
Thank you for your time, Peter.
No, thanks very much indeed, Gloria. That's kind.
You can watch my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel or catch them on the Real Me podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for GB News. Next, we're talking about labour shortages in the food and farming sector. Liberal Democrat MP Wendy Chamberlain is arguing that the government has made it too difficult to hire foreign workers to fill these roles. And she's got a debate that she's leading in Parliament tomorrow. She joins me now from Westminster. Hi, Wendy, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks, Gloria.
Jolly good. Before we talk about your very important debate that you're leading tomorrow, your party, the Liberal Democrats, wrote to the Independent Office for Police Conduct last night asking for an investigation into the decision not to fine the Prime Minister in light of the picture. Why?
Because what's quite clear is that because the Met are not being fully transparent about the inquiry that they carried out, that there are legitimate questions to be raised about that inquiry when those pictures come out. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, Gloria, but it doesn't look like a work event to me. And if, as our understanding is, people who were at that party were fined, it's difficult to understand why others there weren't.
OK, let's look at the debate you are leading in Parliament tomorrow. So it's to discuss serious labour shortages in the food and farming sector. Just explain the nature of those shortages and the impact they're having.
Yeah, well, I'll describe what's happening in my own constituency, North East Fife, which is well known for vegetables, but also soft fruit produce. And the reality is post our departure from the EU, there was a seasonal agricultural worker scheme put in place to help farmers manage those shortages, because previously it was EU labour that did a lot of that work. And the reality is the scheme is oversubscribed, and there's 30,000 places being taken up. The Home Office are supposed to be releasing another 10,000, but because of the Ukraine situation and other factors, people are arriving late. They're potentially less skilled than they were previously. And we really are in a situation where the government says it wants to focus on food security, but without ensuring that farmers have the labour they need to carry out the work, there's a challenge that those farmers won't be in business in the future.
And why won't local workers do the work that's needed?
So absolutely, during COVID, I know farmers in my constituency did a lot of work working with DWP, etc., to attract local people. But the reality is the work is seasonal and it's for short periods of time, and local people generally are looking for paid employment that exists all year round. There's no doubt as well that it's hard work. And we have relied on people coming from overseas to do that work before. I'm supportive of local people doing this work, but I do also know that farmers in my constituency have done a lot to try and secure this. And this is the situation across the UK. Farmers are struggling to recruit the labour needed to get food on our plates.
Just finally, when you have these debates, when backbench MPs have these debates, or when they have these debates in a backbench capacity, I should say, you have the opportunity to put your points directly to the minister responsible. So top of your list tomorrow
is to get those additional 10,000 visas agreed so that farmers can start relying on having those people come to do the work. I think that has got to be the top priority. But I really want a longer and better debate with the Home Office. It feels to me like DEFRA appreciate some of the issues, but we do need the Home Office to move forward.
Wendy Chamberlain, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. I'm back every Monday to Thursday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan, and he is in the studio to give us a sneak preview. Liam, what's coming up?
Well, Gloria, I'll be... Sorry, I didn't know what camera I was looking at. I'll be appearing on The Money for the next hour from 1 p.m. We're discussing food prices. Food prices are up 7% in the last month alone. Discounters like Aldi and Lidl are doing well, but the other supermarkets are seeing sales slide. We're examining the prospect that the Royal Navy could be sent in to try and break what's being called a Russian blockade of grain ports in Ukraine. It's pretty heady stuff. We'll also be examining this stuff, which is Belvoir cordial, seen in many shops these days. We'll be talking to the people who founded this company. It's a family-run company from Leicestershire, and they pick thousands of tons of elderflowers each year. On the Money, here on GB News with me, Liam Halligan.
We always look forward to that. Your views on the politics of the day before we take you to your weather. Paul says disposal of items too large to place in a bin are too costly to have the council remove it. No wonder people dump stuff. Elizabeth says fly tipping is an issue, and to be frank, it's not helped by council's insistence that you should book to get a slot. If it was easier, and maybe the problem will ease up. Michael calls for higher fines and more community service hours. I knew that debate would get you talking. We like to discuss the real issues that are discussed in Parliament, but the issues that affect you. You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Up now, it's your weather, and then it's Liam Halligan.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A day of sunny spells and showers for most of us. Some lively downpours with thunder and hail in the south. But it does turn drier from the west later as a little ridge of high pressure moves in. However, it's the low in the North Sea that is driving the showers across many parts of the country during the bulk of the day, and those showers already getting going out there. Some lively downpours and hail and thunder possible for southern parts. It'll be gusty in the far northeast, but for many it's light winds, and that means the showers will be slow moving. But also there'll be an improvement from the west later, increasingly sunny spells coming through. 18 Celsius in Cardiff, 19 or 20 in London, 16 for Belfast and Glasgow. Into the evening then, and we're going to see the showers continue for a time for eastern Scotland, eastern England as well. Eventually they die away, and then a slice of clear skies crosses the country. Eventually it's the Midlands, East Anglia and the South East that see the clear skies for longest, and here temperatures dipping into the singles figures, perhaps the low single figures by dawn. But in the west, already by dawn, outbreaks of rain, a strengthening wind as well, so a wet and windy start for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England as well as Wales. The rain does move its way eastwards. It turns more